Hello, everybody, and welcome to the G4A show. This is episode 104. I am Jordan, as always, your host of the G4A show, and this week I am joined by one of our new co-hosts, if you haven't seen him already, from Analog Stick Gaming, the Analog Stick Gamer himself, Jeff Young. How are you, Jeff?
Doing well, thank you very much.
There's been a lot of games out over the last couple of weeks, Jeff. I feel like we've been playing a few interesting things, which we'll talk about in a minute. But obviously, let's let people know what our main topic is today, because you might want to skip the what we've been playing section. Our main topic is going to be about licensed games, good and bad. I think Jeff has a few that he's bringing to the table. I've kind of had a very busy week, so I'm going to have a few that kind of just come to me in the discussion. I haven't had time to make a specific list or anything, but I feel like there's been many licensed games over the years, and some that definitely deserve talking about, and some that maybe don't deserve it so much. And there may be one or two as well that you don't realize are licensed games. So that could be an interesting little thing there, because I've got one in my list that I kind of tentatively made that I think people might not realize is a licensed game, or certainly didn't at the time. So we'll get to that later on. But before that, as always, Jeff, I think we should talk about what we've been playing. And I feel like you've been playing certainly at least one game that's very interesting and very of the moment right now. So what have you been playing recently?
Yeah, I've been playing a few. The one that I'm currently kind of still kind of working through little portions of it anyways, and still working on the review, is Power Wash Simulator, which has been kind of blowing up. Simulation games generally don't get this kind of love when it comes to, I guess, like industry talk. We get a few of them that are kind of teased or like kind of poked fun of, but Power Wash Simulator has been kind of this like cathartic adult coloring book in a lot of ways to a lot of people, and it's just fun. Like, it is absolutely a blast. Like, you're just going around cleaning stuff. I mean, that sounds mundane as hell, right? But yeah, like you get like the cooking simulator games where you have a spatula or something in a frying pan. Like, those don't really do much, but this one here, it's like you're coloring from like this like dirty structure to like this clean thing, and it's just this level of progress that you don't get in a lot of other simulation games, but it's super fun.
I haven't played it yet, but I have it downloaded to my machine, because there were two games I sort of went on the Xbox and downloaded on the same day, and I've been playing one of them. Actually, I've been streaming over on the new Twitch channel, which we'll link below. People may have seen me. I've kind of streamed a couple of hours of it so far, which is As Dusk Falls. I don't know if you've played any of that yet, Jeff, but
No, it from the moment I saw it, I had no interest in it.
oh, interesting. Okay, so are you not one for these kind of choose your own adventure style narrative driven games?
A lot of it comes down to the exact same reason why I enjoy a lot of comic books, and that is, sure, a good story is definitely going to, keep your interest on it, but art has always been my defining factor of why I love comic books, because I've seen some comics that have amazing stories, but the art is so bad I can't get through it. As Dust Falls just has a style, a visual style, a presentation that I just have no interest in.
That's really interesting, because I, going in, was somewhat similar to you, not quite as harsh. Like it wasn't enough to put me off of playing the game, but I didn't like the art style before I played the game.
Yeah.
However, I actually think it works very well for a couple of reasons. One is I think it makes the game stand out within its genre as something unique in terms of presentation. And the second is it makes it more like an interactive comic book. That's what when I've been playing it, it feels like an interactive comic book.
It looks like an animatic when you see like behind the scenes in movies.
Yeah. And it's definitely it's not a style that's gonna be for everyone. which is a shame because so far from the couple of chapters I've played, the story that's there is really interesting and actually a very strong story because unlike many others in the genre, this one is so grounded in things that could actually happen in real life. Do you know what I mean? So it's not the Quarry where, spoilers for the Quarry if you haven't played it yet, we're not off fighting werewolves, you know? Like, we're not off dealing with curses and whatever else, but it's just you play as two families, and you basically, one family is moving across the country for reasons that you may or may not know at the start of the game, and then the other family is three brothers who have committed a robbery at the local sheriff's house, and both of these families end up at the same motel. And that's kind of where I am right now, is we're in like a hostage situation in the motel. And obviously, what I do think is interesting, and I'm interested to see with this game, is they've said that the story takes place over decades. So it will actually do a time jump at some point, but these two different families in some way will always be connected in the story, I assume. And I'm quite interested to see where they go with that. But yeah, it's been pleasantly surprising to me so far. I haven't played enough of it to obviously give a final verdict, but I'm very much enjoying it. And I do think for the genre, it does quite a few things that are very unique and won't be to everyone's tastes. But if you like this style of game, it's definitely one that's worth checking out, because it kind of, how can I put it? It leans very heavily into what these games are. So there is no walking around at any point. It is literally you watching cutscenes, making dialogue choices, and doing a few QTEs here and there. It's not like a Detroit Become Human where you're walking around looking for things, or it's not like the Quarry where you're walking around in a given area looking for clues and that kind of stuff. It doesn't have that aspect of gameplay, but it does still have QTEs and dialogue choices. Mm-hmm. So it kind of trims the unnecessary fat from this style of game, if that makes sense. And yeah, so far I'm pleasantly surprised, and I can't wait to play more of it. Have you been playing anything else, Jeff?
Yeah, I was playing a little bit of Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 2, but there was a glitch that wouldn't allow you to access the third level, so I had to wait for a patch. I've been playing a little bit of Bright Memory Infinite, which is definitely showing its small developer technicalities.
Essentially one developer, right? For
yeah,
the majority of the game.
You can definitely see that. It's very janky, and it ticks all the boxes that you'd expect. Like every single first-person shooter mechanic that's been introduced in the last 10 years is here. Mm-hmm. But the one that I kind of put the most time into and I've actually beaten is Stray, which I played through the extra tier, no, the premium tier.
So no spoilers, Jeff, because I have not yet played it, and it will be a game that I'll be playing over the next couple of weeks. Yeah. But is it a good game? Is it, as I've seen the reviews are quite strong on it. Is it something that's worth playing?
Yeah, like I'll leave the context out of it in regards to any opinion I have on it. It lives in that very good to great.
Okay. I know where you mean.
And again, I won't give any context on it. Had the ending done one thing that I wanted, this would have been great to amazing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There's just a part where I'm like, just do the thing. Just do the thing. And no.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, that would have just brought it up.
So for someone who doesn't know what Stray is, obviously without too many spoilers, why don't you just let people know what the game is?
So basically, you're on a little bit of a sojourn with a bunch of other cats, and you got to make a jump. The jump doesn't succeed, and you basically fall into this kind of like wasteland of a cyberpunk kind of city that's kind of occupied by robots. There's context as to where these robots came from and so on and so forth. But you basically play a cat that is essentially tasked with trying to get back to his friends. You end up meeting a robot, a little floating robot that kind of acts as your translator between the robots and yourself. And you basically just kind of go on this adventure, solving puzzles, beating people, building friendships to essentially find your way out of this enclosed robot city.
Mm-hmm.
And like it has light puzzle solving. Like you're not going to be sitting there for an hour and a half trying to figure out a puzzle. They're all extremely simple most of the time. It's just like, hey, I could really use a poncho. I'm cold, so you'll have to go and find detergent to then trade for this, to then trade for a poncho, and so on and so forth. So it's got that part. It's got very light.
So it's almost like puzzling, but puzzling that can be solved just by a little bit of common sense rather than really challenging you.
Yeah, it's got like an order of doing certain things and stuff. Like the city's not open world. They're like small little locations that you can explore that lead into the next. It's got very, very light combat, and I'll say that in like, like finger quotes essentially. Like it's more of a defensive type of combat than offensive. Like you're not like cat scratching and cat jump kicking or anything.
So really you're trying to avoid combat if you can.
Yeah, and everything's like sort of streamlined or sort of set up where it's scripted. It's the script that all the combat areas are scripted. They only happen in those areas.
Okay.
And it's very, very limited. It doesn't hold on to one mechanic too long, because the game's only about 5, 6, 7 hours.
Yeah.
So at most you spend like 40 minutes with like one basic idea.
I like that though. See, I like that in a game, and when you can have this condensed experience that kind of is trying different things and maybe doesn't pull them all off well, but at least they've sort of gone for it. Do you know what I mean? And it seems like it's quite a highly polished game. Like from everything I've seen, it seems like a polished game.
The animations are pretty nice.
I know that some people have been having issues on PC. I've got a couple of friends who have been playing on PC, and there've been issues
something to do with
there.
the shaders or something that's causing some pretty bad frame rate.
So I think there's some issues on PC. So if you haven't played it and you're looking to play it or whatever, maybe PlayStation's the way to go right now. And also, like,
there's a trial for extra and premium, I think, too.
And that's what I was just going to say. Just be aware, obviously, with the new PlayStation Plus that's been around for a month or two now, depending on where you're living. This game is available on that service at the extra and premium tiers.
Yeah, and I Am 8-Bit is bringing out a physical edition on September 20th.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's really nice.
I went and pre-ordered it when I took a bunch of stuff in, and I'm sitting here, I'm like, wait, does it have a physical edition? I typed in like, oh, it's coming out September 20th. I'm like, well, cancel that pre-order. But yeah.
Nice. So go and try it out. If you've got extra or premium already, it sounds like it's worth trying out. I obviously haven't played it yet, but I will do at some point. Maybe we'll do a review episode once we've both kind of finished the game, and maybe that.
If we can toss a spoiler cast on the back end of that, I would totally be down, because I want to talk about that ending.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Let's do that then. Maybe that's what I aim to do, is finish Stray within the next 2 weeks. And when Jeff is on next, maybe we do a Stray spoiler cast. But don't hold us to that yet, because life can sometimes get in the way when you're trying to finish video games.
You said it on the internet. It's true now. There's no lies on the internet.
So, anything else? Any other games we want to kind of shout out before we move on to our main topic today, Jeff?
I don't think I've really been playing much else. No, I think that's pretty much about it, in terms of something that I can kind of like talk to.
You're just waiting for Xenoblade now, right? You're just waiting.
Oh, I know, and I'm like heading out to like on a friggin' like tiny vacation the day that it comes out, but I ordered the collector's edition, right? So I'm at the mercy of the post office.
Well, I hope that goes well for you. So let's talk about licensed games. And we of course want to be kind here. We're always trying to be positive about video games as much as we can, because we don't want to be, just on the internet spreading negativity like many other people tend to do. However, when it comes to licensed games, there are so many good and there are so many bad that you kind of have to put them into one conversation. So that's what we felt like doing today. And I know, Jeff, you've made a little bit of a list. So why don't you start with your first? Let's start with a good, and then we'll go to a bad after that. So we'll go good, bad, if that makes sense.
Sure. One of my goods is going to lead into a bad. So I'll start with that one. So it's a two-parter. So one that came out a couple years ago that's actually still getting content is Dragon Ball Fighters, or Fighter Z.
Mm-hmm.
This was one of the best, probably the best Dragon Ball fighting game.
It was the game that everyone had been waiting for, right? That was the impression
gorgeous.
I got.
Like, it looks amazing. It looks like extremely high quality animation. Like, it's the same team that did, like, the new DNF Duel. So it's a System Artworks or something. I can never remember the studio name. But Dragon Ball Fighters is just fantastic. Like, it looks amazing. It plays amazing. All of the character models and the flashy effects, like, all that stuff is fantastic. And to me, it's one of the best licensed games out there because it captures the property so perfectly. This isn't my example for the bad one, but you see something like Fairy Tale, which came out, like, I don't know, a year and a half ago, and that did not capture the anime property at all, like, at all, in the slightest bit. I was so disappointed in the game. But Dragon Ball FighterZ, like, it totally captures it perfectly, and that kind of leads into my bad one. Is you get something like Dragon Ball Z Teiketsu, which I believe was for the Game Boy Advance, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Like, this was the same team that made Legacy of Goku 2. And they were making that at the exact same time. Like, they were making that, and then a studio came and said, hey, we want a Dragon Ball fighting game. And, like, yeah, sure, we can do that. So they took assets from another game and digitized them into that. And it was so bad. It was the first fighting game they've ever made. And then they were also making a game called Saiyan Smash at the exact same time. And this leads into almost every game that we're probably going to talk about. And that is, licensed games that are generally good are not timed around something and have development time to breathe. But the ones that are bad are the ones where it's like, hey, we have a movie coming out in 8 months. Can you make a video game for us?
There are very few, there are some tie-ins that are great. Let's be clear. There have been great tie-ins in the past. But often when you have a tie-in and you're held to a certain deadline, and these games aren't on my list, but for example, back in the day, the Lord of the Rings games, I loved those. I thought they were brilliant games, but they were held back by having to tie in with the movie releases and having constantly changing scripts and all this kind of stuff.
The development times just were so brutal, and you'd have those teams working on another game at the exact same time.
Absolutely.
So like that's my, like, again, my best, or in terms of that, is like Dragon Ball Fighters, and then go into Dragon Ball Z Taiketsu, which was just rushed for time.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a good one to start, because I have a good one off the top of my head, which I think has been one of the strongest ones in recent times, and that is obviously Spider-Man on PS4. Probably the best Spider-Man game, certainly one of the best Spider-Man games ever released, if not the best. And I think within the last decade, potentially the best licensed game. There's obviously a few up there that kind of we can talk about, but I just think that, like you're saying about Dragon Ball FighterZ, is like, the Spider-Man game from Insomniac just nailed Spider-Man. And they did it in a way where, they weren't tied to a movie. They were able to do their own story, and they did it well because those people love Spider-Man. And the just swinging around in that game, you literally feel like Spider-Man. They basically got it perfect to the point where Miles Morales comes along, and it doesn't need to be different. They don't need to make it.
I thought it was a much tighter game too. I enjoyed the Miles Morales one because of how tighter it was.
Yeah, because it was a slightly smaller experience, right? So they kind of reined it in a little bit, which I get that for sure. Obviously, the reason that for me, the first Spider-Man is on this list is because that's where that franchise started, right? So, just in recent memory, that was one of the ones that really popped into my mind as like, this might be one of the best licensed games ever. And it's certainly,
especially after Activision had Beesnox just run it into the ground, where they're like, "Hey, yeah, we know Shattered Dimensions just came out, but can you get Edge of Time out in 8 months? You can't.
Yeah.
Okay, here's 6 months. Go."
And that's the thing, is that's where I was actually going to go. Is Spider-Man's a funny one because Spider-Man's had some great games, but he's had some awful games as well.
Rise of the Imperfects.
And it's interesting how. That's the funny thing about licensed games, is I think people fear them a little bit. I'm talking about just your general gamer now. I think people fear licensed games a bit because they never know how it's going to go, because it's always a toss-up, right? Because it's always they could be great, but if they're not great, they're usually just bad. There's kind of no in between. And even Spider-Man suffered that. We had Spider-Man 2 back in the PS2 days. That was a great game. As far as games went back then, that was a great game. And then Spider-Man...
It was the first to have the webbing actually attached to the buildings. And that's just because the developer was like, hey, I've been tinkering with this, and it changed everything.
Yeah. And, you can see where Spider-Man 2018 took inspiration from that and kind of built on that and basically is Spider-Man 2, but for a modern audience, with them not being tied to a movie. Yeah,
it was definitely a product of our times, because it took like that kind of like Batman combat in a way.
Absolutely.
It took like the Ubisoft kind of open world stuff, which is my only critique of that game. But
that's probably why you like the slightly tighter Miles Morales, right? Because it still does that same thing.
Yeah, it wasn't like, hey, there's a stronghold. We should like take out those guys. All right, succeeded that one. Peter, yeah, we have 5 more on the map. God damn it! Like that rinse and repeat stuff was just a bit bland.
So I'm gonna ask you then, because I haven't had much time to think about bad licensed games, but if I was to say to you, what is the worst Spider-Man game, which one would you say?
Well, I mean, it's easy enough to go back to like the original Atari one and be like, oh, that looks like 5 Lego bricks taped together, swinging around.
But again, that was very much a product of its time. So
yeah, I mean, like, again, like you get something like Shattered Dimensions and Edge of Time, which are bad in their own way, but they're also good in other ways too. So I don't think they're bad. I will say, I could be getting the name wrong. Web of Shadows.
Web of Shadows sounds right to me.
Yeah, like that one was the one where it was kind of like it had the worst Peter Parker voice ever. Like he was constantly screaming.
That was the only one that I never played as well.
It was
I know what game you're talking about,
like,
and I never played it.
It is easily the worst Spider-Man game that I've played in recent memory because of that voice alone. It was like nails on a chalkboard, and they just cranked that up to like 11.
Oh, and God.
It was the worst Spider-Man voice I've heard. Like, it just wasn't terribly great. A lot of the black suit and red suit choices just felt super, super weird. I'm pretty sure that was the one where like Black Cat would fall off the building, and you'd have to press a button, otherwise you just like splat.
Yeah. And talking of Spider-Man, of course, if you haven't played it, it's being released on PC on August the 12th. So
All the
if
bells and
you're
whistles.
a PC player, maybe it's the time to play that, and it's definitely worth playing. So that's why I
Oh
wanted
yeah.
to bring up Spider-Man as well, because if somebody said to me, "What are the licensed games that are worth playing from like the last 5 years or so?" that would be one of them, right? That would be kind of top of the list there. So Jeff, what are your next pair? One good and one bad. What have you got for us?
Yeah, sure. So one that a lot of people I don't think of really anymore would be Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay.
So I never
Um,
played that, but isn't it like,
so good.
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, I remember people talking about it as probably one of the best games, not even just licensed games. Like,
Yeah, like it had an interesting history because it was originally also supposed to come out for the PlayStation 2. They ended up
oh,
scrapping
okay.
it so they could work on just the Xbox version. It was made in 18 months, which
Wow.
is
Wow.
incredibly tight. It was made by Starbreeze Studios and Trigon. Vin Diesel was an active producer on that game. He constantly had script rewrites because he's like, you're making Riddick say too much. David Twohy as well, the guy who owns the Riddick license, him and Vin basically like shepherd that game into kind of what it was. But it was such a fantastic game. Like it took inspiration from everywhere. Like Vin Diesel was like, hey, I want to have like the game to be largely around like melee punching and stuff. He goes, because I loved what's that Nintendo boxing game?
I don't know. I don't
I
know
can't remember.
which one you're
Um,
thinking of.
I don't know why I can't think of it. Punch Out. There we go. It had like the fighting a Punch Out. He goes, when Riddick is being like escorted through the prison by the prisoners and stuff. He goes, that was my inspiration from like Half-Life. Like he took all these little bits and pieces
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Do you
crafted a
know,
game in
but
18
do you know
months.
that's the thing? That's the one thing I think people don't realize about. Just a quick aside on Vin Diesel for a second,
Yeah,
because people obviously laugh at him now when he's involved in games because he has had some bad ones over his time, right? Of
kind
him
of. Yeah,
being involved in games. However, the guy has a genuine love of games. Like, he knows a lot about video games and he genuinely does love them. Like, I think there was a point in time, I think it was when they did that Wheelman video game. He
Wheelman
signed
was fun.
he signed like a massive deal to do like 6 or 7 games or something. It was going to be essentially like a video game universe of him in video games. And then
Yeah,
I think that game, I actually really liked that game, but people apparently didn't really
you
like
could
it.
jump from car to car. 10 out of 10.
And then what happened later? Saints Row did it, and everybody loved it. It was like, oh, okay,
Yeah,
just got to put it in the right
but
place.
yeah, going from one really good Vin Diesel game to again one really bad
Oh, go
Vin
on
Diesel
then.
game. Well, I mean, he's in it
Hmm.
technically. The Fast and Furious
I knew
Crossroads, I
this was
think is.
coming. I knew
It's
this
so
was
bad.
coming.
Like it is one of the worst games I've ever played. Like first of all, they're like, "Hey,
Yeah.
yeah, we're making a Fast and Furious game," and they show it off at the Game Awards, and
So
like
I
Vin
didn't play
Diesel and
it.
Michelle Rodriguez are like, "Oh my god, this looks amazing!" And like
I
everyone in
didn't
the
play
crowd was
it,
like,
but
"No."
every bit of impression I got was it felt like a game from like 20 years ago. It, it kind of it felt like just the
That's
design
making the games from
aspect of
20
it.
years ago sound bad there, Jordan. Like it was not good.
And that's what I mean. I haven't played it, but at least in terms of the way it was designed, in terms of the design aspects and everything I saw of it, it felt like an early 2000s game, is what I'm essentially
Well,
trying to say.
and you're not even playing as like you're not even playing as the main characters. You're playing as these two secondary characters that you just don't care about. Vin Diesel looks like he was like motion scanned off his like stunt double
And do you know what the worst thing is as well?
that
Fast
it
and
released.
Furious is probably one of the best franchises to be a video game in terms of like they could make an amazing video game out of Fast and Furious.
It's Need for Speed, the live action movie in a lot of ways, even though
Yeah,
they did make a live action Need for Speed,
of
which was
course, of course.
garbage.
So back to me. I wanna talk about a couple of games here, but this is one that's on my list that people might not realize is licensed, but I would consider again one of the best licensed games of all time, and that is Witcher 3. Witcher 3 is a licensed video game. If you don't know, Witcher is based on a set of novels, Polish novels, I believe they are. And yeah, the CD Projekt Red have the license to make those novels into video games, and that's what they've obviously been doing for many years now. But
Yeah.
Witcher 3, even without being a licensed game, is just generally one of the best games probably ever made.
It's one of the most revolutionary as well, because like Assassin's Creed was just kind of like, oh, we're just going to copy that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's literally it. You know, when did that game come out? 2015,
Something like
and
that.
and since then, if we look at how open worlds have gone and how other RPG, certainly Western RPGs, have gone, we can see Witcher 3 DNA all over them, right? And that's not to say that Witcher didn't take from other games in the first place. Of course they did, but they added their own spin to things and they executed it in their own way. And now everybody uses that as the blueprint for
Yeah.
that style of game. And yeah, you know, you may not, that is one that you may not realize was a licensed game, but for my money, one of the best licensed video games ever made. So there's that. And then the other one I want to shout out is another good one because I don't have a bad one, but some people might consider this game bad. And that is old school GoldenEye from the N64. You know,
I have that on my list. I'll scratch that off then.
it's of course, if you go back to it now, you could say, yeah, this isn't a great game. I don't get what the hype was around it. But at the time on console, there was nothing like it. It was the thing. Like people bought the N64 to play that game. You know,
Yeah.
it was,
And it was delayed a lot too. Like it originally was supposed to meet the theatrical release, and then they ended up meeting the video release like a year later. So,
and the fact that they were actually allowed to delay the game as well, you know, for a licensed kind of tie-in game, the fact that they were given that time to delay the game is quite unbelievable, really, because that doesn't happen, right? That doesn't.
And it technically, if you think about it, it was one of the first licensed games to garner the attention of major publishers in bidding wars, because EA was then like, hey, we can make James Bond games as well, and we can make them to sell like 10 times that amount. And then they ended up purchasing the license and going forward with it for a while.
Of course. It does make me think, though, now we're talking about GoldenEye, it makes me think of a couple of bad licensed games, and I can't remember what they're called. You may remember them. But wasn't Bruce Willis in a licensed game that was like awful?
I think it was Bruce Willis Armageddon. No, Apocalypse.
He had some.
Apocalypse. It was Bruce Willis Apocalypse. He originally was supposed to be the sidekick character and not the main character, and then they ended up like revamping that game, but they didn't change any of the dialogue. So it's so weird to hear him say some stuff because it was written in a way, I think, that made his dialogue still work. But yeah, it was not a great game.
So for some reason that just popped into my mind after talking about GoldenEye. So I wanted to bring it up because
even the Fifth Element game wasn't that great either.
Yeah, I mean, he's had a couple of weird ones. You know, there's a couple of Die Hard games. I know people do like some of those. There was one I remember playing on the GameCube, which was Die Hard Vendetta, I believe it was called, which I enjoyed, but I don't know how good of a game it was. Does that make sense? Like, at the time, I was around 10 years old, and it's like, yeah, I enjoyed it because I'm a 10-year-old and I'm going around, you know, like killing bad guys and whatever. But yeah, I don't know how good it really was.
Yeah, a lot of those like old movie ones like Die Hard and even like the True Lies game, I just remember it because I could roll
How do we
Like he would
feel?
just roll.
How do we feel about King Kong? You remember that game?
Oh yeah, the game that sold the Xbox 360 and that HD DVD drive. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, like, and that can actually lead into my next one. Actually,
Nice,
is
nice.
Peter Jackson was involved in that
Was he?
because, like, yeah, he was involved with that King Kong game as far as I know, because he had
Oh
directed the
God.
movie, and he ended up seeing I think Beyond Good and Evil from the guy that was spearheading it at the time. He was the French developer, and he ended up getting him to make that game, if I recall correctly. I think
You
it was
might
a
be right. That sounds
I think it was a
familiar to me.
collaboration between the two of them. But yeah, because like that was a game where the creators were involved and they shared a lot of the tech and stuff. Because it was a visually amazing game at the time. Like that was a game when they
It
first showed
was,
it
yeah.
off. They're like, "Holy crap, these graphics look
And it
amazing."
was also easy gamer score, right? That's why people
Not
loved
quite
it.
as easy as the Avatar game, where you could just literally stand in one spot and just perform a 50 hit combo and get all 1,000 gamer score, which I totally did. But going into a game where the creators were involved and why it led to how good it was both South Park Stick of Truth
Oh, so
and
that
Fractured
was
But
on my
Whole.
list. That was so
Yeah,
both of those were on my list. I didn't actually play much of the second one, so I need to go back and play it.
they're
But
both great. Like,
Stick of
Trey Parker and
Truth,
Matt Stone, like they were directly involved.
and the thing is as well, we don't get many comedy games, right? And they were able to keep that South Park comedy and translate it to a game that was an enjoyable game to play. Like that's the thing. It didn't feel like, oh, I'm just watching South Park. Like it was still a game, right? But
Yeah.
they kept everything that makes South Park in it. And that is a tremendous achievement. And then to go and do it again with a second game is like sometimes that can be dangerous for licensed properties, right? Like doing a sequel because you hit it out the park once and then if you do it again, people might just think, oh, you're just doing the
Well,
same thing again. But
I
actually they
think
put an
they,
interesting spin on it and and pulled it off again.
yeah, I think the only reason that they wanted to do it was they said, okay, if we do it, we don't want it to be anything like the last one.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the most South Park thing that series has ever done was actually the first South Park game for the N64 because they made it where you couldn't even beat it. Like it was impossible to beat that game without like the Game Genie or the Game Shark or whatever it was. But I mean, like yeah, when you get the creators involved, like that is
Yeah.
very very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why. Do you know what we? And again, this is a little bit of an aside, so I apologize, but we take tangents on this show. If you haven't watched before, if you haven't listened before, we like a good tangent here and there. But we've obviously seen a lot of actors crossing over into video games. And I do think we're going to see movie directors cross over into games as well. We've seen a little bit of like collaboration in the past,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't be surprised to see someone like Christopher Nolan make a video game. Do you know what I mean? Like it it just wouldn't surprise me if he has some crazy thing in his head where he's like, oh, this is a really cool concept, especially what he does with time in his movies and all that kind of stuff. And what you could do using those concepts in video games, I think is super interesting. And it just, what you said there about having the creators involved of a certain licensed product in the game, like having them involved with it, makes such a difference, right? Because they know what's right for the world and what isn't, and they help to execute those things. Um, and it's the same with licensed games that are tie-ins to movies. The
Mm-hmm.
ones that come off really well are the ones that work very closely with the movie team, and they get to see drafts of the movie, they get to see scenes and all this sort of stuff, you know, like going back to the Lord of the Rings video games from the PS2 days. Those were great games because they worked so closely with the people making the movies. It's like, yeah, come and see this. This is what we're doing. And then it's like, and there were levels in those games that actually helped to build on the story of the movies to some extent as well. They kind of filled in little holes here and there, but that's only done through a great understanding and respect from both sides. So, like you're saying, having the creators involved is always a good thing, right? And it makes me think of something like we've got obviously the Rick and Morty creators now making video games, and it's like, will they eventually do something that's kind of fully licensed where they'll have a product that is a TV show or whatever, and then they're going to turn it into a full-on game? Because right now there's a bit of a disconnect, right? They still have their humor, of course, but they haven't fully licensed one of their products into a game, right? As far as I am aware. So are we going to get a Rick and Morty video game at some point? Who knows? Some of these games they've been making feel like they've been planning those kind of things.
Licensing also has the issue of where, like, once that licensing kind of wears out, you can't access that stuff anymore. So, like, you take a look at, like, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1 and 2. Like, I don't think you can even buy those games anymore because Activision doesn't have the Marvel
wasn't there a story recently about one of those Ultimate Alliance games that you literally you can't access those games anymore unless you
or even the DLC as well.
Unless you own the original physical copy of the game.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. It's the same as we see issues with licenses for music in certain games, right? Or licenses for cars. The reason that Xbox cannot sell Forza 7 anymore is because of licenses.
Yeah.
They can't stop you from playing the game if you own it. Yeah. And they can keep it up digitally for people who own it, but they are not allowed to sell the game anymore. And, that is one of the downfalls of licensing in video games.
Yeah.
Is unless these companies keep paying for the license over a long period of time, eventually you can't buy the game anymore. And if you kind of miss your chance, you're never going to be able to buy that game, So yeah, and there are some great ones out there. Like, I'm sure you've got a couple more on your list, Jeff, but as I kind of think about it, it's like there are some that I love that I know aren't great games either. So, like, there was a Punisher game back in the day on the PS2, and I loved that game. I thought it was a brilliant game. It wasn't a good, you know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's like, it wasn't a great game, but it was just fun to play. That was my thing at the time, and
it wasn't even tied to anything as well too. Like, it wasn't based; it was an original story.
And that's what I love about some of these licensed games is it's just taking an IP that you know and love and using the world of that IP to make something fun. That's what Spiderman 2018 did. They had so many characters to play with, but they did their own thing. They had clearance to tell their own story within that world.
Same with, like, the Batman Arkham games. Like, that revolutionized Batman for a lot of people. Yeah. Like, that was a massive title for them.
So they were going to be my next shout out. I don't want to spend too much time on superhero kind of tie-ins and video games, but Batman, the Arkham games felt like it changed the attitude towards licensed games. They felt like, they came out in what, like 2008 roughly, was like around that kind of time, 2008, 2010. And it felt like they changed the attitude towards licensed games, where before that, a lot of licensed games either felt like cash grabs or they felt like kind of failed movie tie-ins with the odd very good one here and there, right? And then after the Arkham games, we've had things like Spider-Man, we've had things like the Shadow of Mordor game, which won many Game of the Year awards, you know, so that was clearly a very good licensed game. We've obviously
Yeah.
got the Gollum game coming up. We'll see where that one falls in terms of this
Falls is the
conversation.
right term.
But yeah, there's so many, and I want to know, Jeff, what are the couple more that you have there for us?
Sure. So sticking with like the creators kind of involved in some aspects of it, Aladdin on the Genesis.
Oh wow, we're going
So
back some way now.
we're going back. Like there was two Aladdin games. There was one for the Genesis and one for the Super Nintendo. Super Nintendo was made by Capcom. I played a little bit of it. I didn't care for it, but I loved the Genesis one. Now the Genesis one was originally going to be developed by Sega and be made by the same team that ended up making one of the Jurassic Park games. But Disney took a look at what they were doing and they were like, this is awful. And so they ended up working a deal with Virgin to develop it. And it was one of the first deals in major console publishers where the publisher would be the console manufacturer, but they wouldn't be the developer.
Yeah, that's very rare.
it was the first of its kind among major console publishers, and because they worked out rights and details and stuff. And I don't think Sega made much money.
Obviously, we see that more now especially with like second party games and stuff like that. But back in those days, and even all the way up to probably the mid 2000s, that was very rare. You know, where a console manufacturer would publish a game that they hadn't made themselves. Very rare.
Yeah, and Disney like provided like hand-drawn assets, and it was actually the first video game to use hand-drawn animation. So like Cuphead is the latest, but Aladdin was the first game to use hand-drawn animation.
So without Aladdin, in a weird way, you may not have got Cuphead. Is what we're essentially saying.
Like Aladdin for the Genesis to me was the superior game by far.
Okay,
but yeah,
good to know. That I mean, that one was a little bit before my time, so I'm glad you're here, Jeff, to bring that one up because
keeping it with the Genesis very briefly is if you are familiar with 7-Up, the pop.
Yeah.
That little red dot that lives there. His name is Cool Spot, and that bastard had a video game.
Really?
Yep. Cool Spot for the Genesis. You were hopping over sand dunes and like beach things. Like they had a game. 7-Up. That's Cool Spot right there. He had a game. Dude had a game. Oh. And like every mascot of that era had a game. Like the Noid from what was it?
I was going to say back then there was
it Dominoes or something?
We have to talk about, I'm sorry, but we do have to talk about the worst licensed video game ever made, though. Ever.
We already did. Fast and Furious Crossroads.
No. E.T. E.T.
Hey, that game was so good, they hoarded all the copies because they didn't want people to enjoy it and then buried it in the desert.
Like,
no one will play my masterpiece.
Like, that will literally never happen again. They literally buried the game. It's like what? You know, it's like, do you know what though? I often think to myself, E.T. is the kind of property where imagine if they were able to make a game of that now, right? Imagine if there was a reason that they would go and make a game of that now, because I get why they would want to make a game of that property. You know, it's one of
match 3. Come on.
It's one of the biggest properties known to man. Like everyone knows what ET is, right?
It launched Drew Barrymore's career.
And it's just like that is, if you don't know the story of the ET video game, please Google it, because it is something that will never happen again. Like, these games literally got buried. Like, I hate to think how much money was lost on this on this video game.
They had like there's I'm pretty sure it was covered, and one of the reasons why I know probably as much as I do about most licensed games actually is a shout out to one of my favorite YouTube channels out there, and that is What Happened with Matt McMuscles. His What Happened series is just amazing because it'll be like you'll think about a game, and he's probably covered it in regards to like, oh, this team had like 6 months to make it, but then they were also making another game, and then that game got canceled, and then this one shifted around. Like ET is like one of those games where that studio was like, oh yeah, we can totally make a game, and they're like, we can't make a game.
And also the other thing is, no disrespect to games back then, because they were limited in terms of the tech they had available, right? But many games were basically the same game with a different skin. And that was the problem they fell into, because that became every single property out there pretty much known to man. Like you were saying with mascots and everything earlier, they just wanted licensed video games. Like they
Pepsi Man got a game. The Burger King got a game.
like it literally was ridiculous. And
Doritos Crash Course.
And I'm, in some ways, I'm very glad that was before my time, because that would have been so mind numbing to just see all of these games. And it's like, you're basically the same game. So why would I bother? It's, and then, like I said, I do think in more recent times, probably the last decade or so, we've had a very kind of positive experience with licensed video games for the most part.
Mostly, yeah. They've smartened up in terms of the timetables needed to make these games.
And of course, let's talk about Square Enix for a minute, because they had Avengers, but then they also had Guardians of the Galaxy. So they might have messed one up a little bit because they tried to force it into a certain direction. But the other one, they probably did, a massive
the worst
amount
marketing that they could have done with that game.
Yeah.
It was like Avengers soured them the taste of anything Guardians was going to offer. And then once people started playing Guardians, they're like, this is actually good.
Yeah. Yeah, like people were genuinely surprised, right? It was like
that marketing didn't do any favors. I remember seeing like I watched probably like 7 or 8 like
and do you
reveals
know what
of
I think
trailer.
That was is I think again it goes back to what I was saying earlier about people being cautious of licensed games, right? Because once you mess up once with a licensed game, people aren't going to trust you as much the next time. But also, Square clearly themselves lost faith in that game because of how Avengers went, right? Because Avengers went poorly, they probably thought, okay, we're not going to pour as much into the marketing here. We're not going to spend as many resources and time marketing this game because we're not certain that it's going to come off well. And if it turns into another Avengers, we don't want to have a situation where we've wasted hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing something that doesn't really matter, right? And in the grand scheme, Guardians was the game they should have marketed more. Like, Guardians is one of Square's best games in recent years. That Square has many ups and downs, but that Guardians game is great.
And speaking of Square, speaking of developers that have kind of fallen from grace, you take a look at like Platinum. Now, Babylon's Fall is not a licensed game, but it is a Square Enix game. That's where the connection is. But the connection leads to Platinum. Now, Platinum has had a history of making some fantastic games. Everything from Bayonetta to they made, Nier Automata. Now, Platinum had 2 licensed games that did not do well. And that is Legend of Korra, based off the Nickelodeon animated series, which was very disappointing to play. I was a massive fan of Legend of Korra, and that game was just not fun. But then you also have TMNT Mutants in Manhattan, which was just one of those games where like you would expect a Ninja Turtles game by Platinum to be absolutely kick-ass. And much like Legend of Korra, both of those games were kind of that signal out there that Platinum's name no longer meant quality. Both of those games failed to perform. They weren't great representations of their license, and they just were not. They were just not good games.
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that for sure. Before we kind of sign off here, Jeff, have you got any more that you want to shout out? Because we've obviously talked about a lot of licensed games here. So
yeah, I'll rattle off my last little bit. You get Superman 64, which was made by a team that was kind of like, hey, we can get the Superman license, right? And they're like, yeah, sure, you can have it. And they're like, oh crap, we actually have to make a game. And they made a horrible game because the N64's architecture was like, we can't render a city. Well, what if we just completely drape it in kryptonite gas or whatever it was? And it was, you're like, well, we don't have the tech to make him fight anything. Well, what if we have him just like race through rings? Like, Super Mario 64 was awful. Then you also have awful licensed games that come with lawsuits and misleading marketing, which is Alien Colonial Marines, which was a game that, like, again, like they sold us off being this certain game. There were lawsuits, there were misled marketing.
But then there's also been very good Alien games.
Oh, there has, and there continues to be. But then you also
that
have
one was
like
a horror show, right? That one. Oh God, I remember.
Speaking of a horror show, Connect Star Wars. Do you remember when you could dance in Jabba's palace? Like, that game was just awful. And I mean, like they even made like Star Wars based 360s.
I'm just imagining you now, Jeff, stood there dancing around.
Oh, of course. Like that Han Solo song. Oh God, I can't even remember it anymore. I mean, that one was really bad. But then, like, again, like you've got some really good stuff as well too coming. Like that's been out, like Shredder's Revenge, which is probably one of the best licensed Turtles games like in years. Cowabunga Collection coming out the end of August. Like that's going to be fantastic because that's every Turtles game I think ever made.
I mean that seems like funny timing on that one though, right? That seems like, oh, this game did really well, so now let's capitalize on the interest in our IP again. You know, it's like I get it.
Yeah, but I mean those games were announced so long ago too that I don't think that same type of synergy was kind of predicted in that sense. I think they knew what they had, but like that Cowabunga Collection is going to be fantastic. Then we also have like, and again, like it just suffered a delay, but that new Avatar game that's coming out by Ubisoft. Like apparently it looks gorgeous. It just plays like crap. So I think they're spending that extra year to
look,
fine tune it.
So I have to be obviously a little bit careful around what I say about Ubisoft games because as I used to have my time there, I know things, But what I will say is what interests me about that one as a player is it's an Avatar game that isn't tied to the movie, right? So so actually they could do some really interesting things in that world. And the fact that it's been delayed proves that it's not tied to the movie because the movie will be out. Do you know what I mean?
It'll be tied to the second theatrical release of that movie when they add 8 extra minutes of it. Like way more water is what the next one is going to be when they bring it back out again.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of interesting licensed games on the horizon. Some that obviously will probably pan out well, given who's working. For example, I am quite intrigued by the Avatar game because I really like the team that's working on it. They made the Division games, and I think they've proven that they can make good video games.
Is it the Snowdrop ending?
It is.
Oh, okay.
So let's see what they do with that. Then on the other end of that, not to be too critical, but that Lord of the Rings Gollum game so far looks like it's going to be bad. it looks like it's going to be a bad video game. Obviously, as always, we reserve judgment, and I'm sure maybe Jeff will review that game when it comes out. Maybe we can get you
Depends
on
if
a
I can get a
review.
code. I don't know if I really want to spend, if they do that $10 premium Series X version that Sony kind of started with their extra $10, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, man. No,
Um,
I get that. Um,
like there's
Go on,
there's
Jeff.
lots of licensed games that a
Absolutely.
lot of them have made the jump to mobile
Yeah.
because they can be more financially viable there, whether
Absolutely.
it's like
Absolutely.
Disney with all of their 10 different like character based random gotcha games and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So what I want to know from people, obviously we've spoken about a lot of licensed games here, but there are many that we missed because there are probably thousands over the years. Um and we're all of different ages as well, so we play different video games. So, what I want to know from people in the YouTube comments or over on Twitter, you can obviously tweet at us at G4A Network or at Eat Sleep Game as well. And then Jeff has his Twitter, which we will link below. But you can also find him on analogstickgaming.com. So, I'm
Yeah.
sure he'll like some. He's got a little section for the show now. But yeah, come and tell us what is the best licensed video game you've played, and what is the worst licensed video game you've played?
And what's a license that has not been made into a video game that you would like to see? Because I
Yeah.
want a proper ass Thundercats game.
Oh my
Like
god.
I think we got a DS one based off that new animated series where like Panthro loses his arm in the first arc or whatever. But yeah, like we never got a good Thundercats game. I don't think we even got a good He-Man game.
Yeah,
Like,
man.
come on.
Yeah, there's a few there that can be used for sure. Right. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. This has been episode 104. Jeff will be back in 2 weeks. I'm joined by Matt next week, where we should be talking about the best PlayStation games of all time. So tune in for that one because, and yeah, we will see you next time. Follow us on Twitter and all that stuff. Go and check out some of Jeff's reviews because he's always doing reviews. I'm sure he's got some coming up soon that he can't tell you about yet.
Power Wash and Stray. Those are my next two.
Nice, nice. And yeah, like I said, Jeff will be back in a couple of weeks. Not sure what we'll be talking about yet, but we probably will talk about Stray, whether that's a full spoiler cast or kind of some more impressions because I've played it. We'll see. But yeah, keep tuned, obviously, to the channel. Subscribe, like, give us a rating on Spotify. Follow us on all the socials that we have linked down below. And we will see you next time. Goodbye.
See ya.